Hello friends, Raj back with you today. Hope this finds you well. Today I have an unboxing, a demo, and a review of this here guitar. The Slick brand SL51 T-style guitar. Let's do it.
Well, we're gonna say it again now.
Before we get into it, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps me to create more content for the channel and to hopefully keep on bringing you guys some useful information. So a couple years ago, I reviewed this guitar's cousin, the SL57, which is the Strat style guitar from Slick, or one of the Strat style guitars from Slick. These guitars are sold through Guitarfetish, and although I don't have a deep working knowledge of the inside of Guitarfetish and Xavier and Slick products, my guess is they're all made to spec. I say that because I have purchased a couple of the XGP necks, and the first one I ordered was exactly the same headstock shape as this guy here. They've since changed that line a little bit. So here we have it. I'll put some of the specs on screen right there, right there. My review of the 57 was pretty glowing, and it's one of my most viewed videos, which is not saying a whole lot, but I thank you for watching. If you haven't, there's a link. So let's put it there. How about there? That's neat. Can you put it there? I don't know if you can put it there or not. So this guitar from here to here should be about the same as the 57. Let me give you the Cliff Notes version of this review. It's a very solid guitar. Just like the 57, I think they're punching above their weight class. It feels much higher end than the price would indicate. That's not to say that you're going to fall in love with this guitar if you're a Telly fan. There are some things that are very Telly-ish, some things that are very not Telly-ish. Some of those are aesthetic, and some of those are in the actual specs. So let's dive in a little bit, shall we? The first thing I'll say is, compared to the 57, there's a couple things I noticed on the neck that seem to be a little bit different. And I don't want to suggest that Guitarfetish or whoever supplying their guitars is slacking. But if you look at this headstock, you'll see the paint/dye job. Now, I don't think that's any sort of a veneer. I think that it's just literally painted on black there. I can't go back and look at my 57 because I completely stripped that headstock off, but that wasn't a veneer. I don't think this is a veneer. I think it's just a poorly painted splatter marks all the way around. That doesn't really bother me particularly because in general, I just don't like this headstock. I don't like the logo. I'm not really a fan of having color on the headstock at all, but that's completely aesthetic and you may absolutely love it. I'll try to get over it as best as I can for the rest of this review. So either you like this headstock shape or it makes you feel like BC Rich made a telly, which maybe they did. It's actually not that bad. It's not the worst I've seen by far, and you may love it. So on to the tuners. These are the same tuners on paper anyway that come in all the slicks and have for quite some time. They work fairly well. They're not great. I'll put the gear ratio up if I can find it. It doesn't feel like it's super high. It doesn't feel super high end, but they are stable. So you have the ratio, which makes it a little easier to fine tune, but then you have stability. You know, is there slack? I'd say these are kind of middle ground for me. And I guess there are probably hundreds of things that could have happened between then and now, but it seems as though the tuners on the 57 were just a little better in terms of overall operation. Moving on to the nut, I'll put the specs up for string spacing and material and all that good stuff. I've noticed a little bit of pinging while I was tuning up, so it probably does need a little bit of work. I haven't done anything so far, and that's a little unfair. I usually do that right off the bat. But because of my glowing review of the 57 and the way that my reviews have changed since then, I guess a little bit, I wanted to kind of leave it. So I didn't want to do any fretwork or work on the nut or basically anything that needed any sort of filing or removing of materials. The neck itself is a satin finish, feels very much like raw wood, which is great. The tilt back headstock, which makes string trees not necessary, which is kind of awesome. Again, I'm not really a fan of how it looks, but perhaps I should just get over that. Medium jumbo frets, which had a little bit of grime on them when I first got the guitar, but after a few hours of playing, it seems to have worn off. So they weren't a high polish, but they seem to have been dressed pretty well. And that goes for the ends too, and there's nothing at all sticking out. Definitely a step up from some other budget guitars. So moving down to the body, this is where we get a little bit more telly-ish. If you've been looking at these guitars for any length of time, you probably know that they basically spray one coat of automotive paint on these guys, scruff it up a little bit, and away you go. So it's, I wouldn't say it's really relic, but it kind of has that vibe to it. There's some spots where the paint is worn, especially on the edges, you know, but it's not overly done. Much like the 57 I got, it's pretty tasteful. It feels worn in, and it breathes, and it doesn't feel like poly, which is worth the price of admission alone. Stop putting half an inch of poly on your guitars. You could sell them for more. I just don't understand. So pretty much from that point on, you've got the typical and classic telly appointments, three-way switch, some brass knurled, textured knobs, which are very nice and you know, have a little bit of resistance, which I personally like, and is very much the same as the 57. I'll get into the guts later, but this plate, along with the bridge itself, look like a step up from your typical budget guitar in terms of thickness and overall quality. I will say that I was a little disappointed to see the high polished chrome on both the bridge and the control plate, but I'm guessing they were saving some costs there. It would have been nice to see aged, and it would have fit the guitar's aesthetic a little bit better, but c'est la vie. Small thing, but worth noting, you've got brass strap buttons with stainless steel screws, but that's okay. And they are what I would consider pro size, so not the tiny little pot metal strap buttons that you see on some budget guitars. I'm gonna hide my serial number, lest you try to steal my slick. This is pretty much the same as it was on the 57, although the machining seems to have taken a weird turn. This is super, super sharp. So sharp that I feel like if I went fast enough, I could actually cut my fingers on it. I haven't yet, so maybe I'm wrong, but that is a very sharp cut. So buyer beware in more ways than one. Neck pocket is tight, and all that fit and finish stuff is right on point. There's a little discoloration right there, but I think it's just a continuation of the paint job. So all in all, I like the body a lot. It's got good heft. I'll put the weight up there. Is that joke getting old? Yeah. The ferrules are brass, which is a nice touch. It's always difficult to impart on one of these videos how a guitar feels. The moment I pick up a guitar, I usually have an opinion. about it. My opinion about this in terms of its build quality is that it's really good. Definitely hitting above its weight class, and if I was to go into a shop and I didn't know anything about this brand, I would suspect this guitar to cost $500-600. With a proper setup and going through, maybe tack another $50-100 onto that. So I think it's a great value. That's the short of it. Let's get into some more things, shall we? I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess on a couple things before I actually dig into it and show you guys. I'm gonna guess these are full-size pots. I'm gonna guess they're 250. I'm gonna guess it's a decent looking switch that's not necessarily a printed circuit board, plasticky kind of thing, because it feels nice and solid, has a pretty good sound to it. As silly as that sounds, it's a thing. My impression of the whole control plate and controls is that they're solid, they feel pro, and I would suspect they're gonna last a while. We'll see if I'm right on the size of the pots here in a sec. Moving along to the bridge. So here's one thing I did change on this guitar. If you flip these saddles around, which is the way they came, they are the compensated saddles. And oddly, and ironically, the compensated saddles on this guitar kept it from tuning. It just kept the intonation out. I could not get anything right. When I flipped them around, which between you, me, and the wall is the way I prefer it, I was able to intonate it right away, and the tuning has been great. All the way up and down the neck. You also might notice, if you're a telly person, that these saddles are very far out on their screws. And I have a few thoughts about that relate. By the way, there's Earl Slick again. So the further that the saddle is out from the string through, the less the break angle. And the less the break angle, I feel, really changes the feel of the guitar. Like, substantially changes it. And it seems weird. It's only a half an inch or so difference from, say, this guitar. You can see how much closer these compensated saddles, which work on this guitar, by the way, are to the string through than this guitar. I point that out because one of the things that confuses me a little bit about this review and about this guitar is just a general feel of the guitar. I haven't changed the strings. I believe these are XL10s, which I use NYXLs, so not too terribly far away. And I use 10s, same gauge. I should be right at home on this guitar. The neck is not quite as deep as the necks on some of my spec-built guitars, but I have other tellies whose necks are this thin. I measured out the nut width and the string width from string to string, and it's a little wider. I mean, we're talking about thousandths of an inch wider as you move down the fretboard. But again, I have other guitars, other tellies that are very, very close to all those specs. But this guitar feels way different than any other telly I have. It feels more like I'm playing a Gibson. And that's not a negative statement, but it is a little disconcerting. When I sit down and play this thing after playing another telly, I feel a little confused. My hands feel a little confused. And then, of course, you get used to just about anything you play for a while. So I don't really know. I have to chalk it up to the break angle here, the break angle here, the tension on the strings, the 12-inch radius all the way down. When I build a guitar to spec, I'm usually using a Warmoth that has a compound radius, which is 10 to 16, I believe, their old compound radius. So it's just a little strange. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's different. And honestly, I think that's probably a good thing because it doesn't impair the playability of the guitar in any sort of way. It's just different. So keep that in mind. It's not going to feel like you're playing a Fender. It's not a Fender, so that's okay. Moving on to the pickups. So if you get online and you search for best budget pickups, the GFS, Guitarfetish pickups will always be part of that conversation. I don't disagree with that assessment. It depends on what your budget is. If you're talking 20, 30, 40 bucks, I think they belong in that conversation. If you're talking $100, which is still maybe unfortunately part of the discussion about budget pickups, I think you start to maybe leave most of these behind. That's not to say that these are bad in any way, shape, or form. But if you're hoping for or expecting Lawlers, you're probably going to be disappointed. Not only are those much more expensive, darn near the price of this guitar for the set of vintage telly pickups, but they're just a different character overall. A much more open high end and probably just a bit better of a balance throughout. But I do think these have their place. They do sound telly-ish. I feel like for my playing and for my styles or whatever, that maybe they don't complement each other so well. I can get a pretty good tone out of each position, but I would want to tweak the settings on the amp fairly considerably on each one of those positions. So your mileage may vary, depends on what kind of amp you play through and all that good stuff. But for me, the neck pickup doesn't have quite the open end airiness up top of some of the more high end pickups, and the bridge pickup has a quack, which is good. But again, compared to high-end pickups, it's not quite as balanced as you might find, and it doesn't have quite the same body, and the snap seems to be in a little bit of a different place. But very usable, and depending, again, on which amp you use and your settings, you can get a very usable sound. That brings me to my one major criticism of this guitar, and a pet peeve in general for budget guitars, because I think it's a terrible, terrible place to save money. And that is the jack. Now, this jack isn't the worst I've seen. I've certainly seen worse. The plating is a little thicker maybe than on some budget brand tellies, but it's still very thin, and it doesn't compare to the general quality of the control plate or the bridge plate. But moreover, just please stop putting that style of jack on a telly. For an extra couple bucks, you can put one of these guys in. It stays in place. I've had that on this 52 reissue for at least a decade. I don't think I've ever touched it. I've had this guitar for 2.5 days, and I've had to tighten this already twice. So be prepared. This will loosen on you. Get some Loctite. I don't know, spend $5, replace it, just get rid of it. I know that's a bit of a weird rant. The thing is, the rest of this guitar, whether you like the aesthetic of the headstock or logo or not, feels like a quality instrument. All of it, the entire thing, whether or not I like the appointments, feels like a quality instrument that you'd pay $500-600 for. Then you get to this jack and you're like, oh, no, not so much. So it's kind of silly. Usually when I do a budget guitar review, I go over the several things you could change out to make the guitar so much better than what you paid for it. And I feel on the slicks, if you like the appointments, if you like the aesthetics, if you like the specs of the guitar itself, it's hard to be disappointed with what you get for, $250 or so bucks, aside from the jack, of course. So that's my takeaway for the Slick SL51. I love tellies. I have quite a few, more than I probably need. And some of them have particular jobs. There are deluxes and there are tellies with P90s. And this guitar might find its way into my heart as the telly that feels more like a SG. It's not something I go to for like a clean funk sound, but when you get into that tweed territory, there are things about these pickups and the general sound and the general response of the guitar in terms of the way it feels that actually might, in some instances, beat out some of my more high-end instruments in that particular scenario. Because with the tweed, I find like I'm trying to manage that high end a little bit more and rolling the tone on the amp, rolling the tone on the guitar itself. So maybe this will fit that bill more closely than some other guitars. It costs quite a bit more. I'm going to try to step out of my own shoes as a telly lover and mirror something I said on my Firefly review, which is this. If you're just looking for a telly to fit a sound in the studio, you just need something that sounds like a Telecaster. If you have a Strat and you've got a Les Paul or a 335 and you just need that telly, this could be the winner chicken dinner. I think that the materials and the construction of the guitar in general are probably a step above most other budget brands. Some of those guitars will be half the price of this one. It's hard to compare, and it may not be the very best value, but it is a guitar that I believe is going to be around for quite some time. I don't think you're going to have troubles with things breaking down, aside from the jack. So that's a good thing to weigh when you're making your decision. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you found this useful. Be sure to subscribe and like, and we will see you real soon.